the spreadsheet and sort of got my head around all of the different people talking, and it looks like it's really come together, so that's exciting. So today I'll just share my screen and give me a moment. Can we see that all right? Is that coming up full screen? Awesome. So the topic that Songi sort of gave me a provocation to chat about today was around remote teamwork and what are the principles and like what are the ways in which we can do high performance remote teams. So I'm going to chat through that for we've got about an hour, I believe. Is that right, Songi? Just under?
It will be 15 minutes in total. So
sure.
You can go the presentation and maybe people have questions, and if you can cover Q&A, that would be amazing.
Perfect. I'm going to this will definitely be less about me sharing lots and lots of content and ideas and lots more about me sharing questions and things that you can think about to go away. So just like a tiny little bit of background before we jump in. So my name is Ants. I spent the better part of the last decade working mainly with a group called Enspiral out of Wellington in New Zealand, and now living in Melbourne and working also closely with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. Both of them are entrepreneurial communities made up of lots and lots of different startups and teams. And so my role, I've done lots of different things, but one of the main threads of work that I've been doing is a lot of entrepreneurial team building, community building, and running and developing accelerator programs. So I can definitely empathize with where you're all at. It's like such a pressure cooker environment, and you have so many things to do, and you're probably getting a lot of information thrown at you. So today, I guess I'll be adding some fuel to that fire and just sort of signaling as well. A couple of years ago, we put this book together called Better Work Together, which was really a reflection back on the first sort of 8 years of Inspiral's development and growth, and it was co-authored by a group of folks, but lots of different perspectives about how to do this stuff, and I'll be referencing some of the content in that today. So just as a kind of quick who's in the room, I was wondering if it'd be worth, I know you guys have been using the chat to chat quickly to each other, just getting a sense of like what stage of development people are at in their team. So I'd love to know and just hear how many people are in the teams that you're working in, and how long have you been sort of working together in those teams, just to get a sense of that. And my current assumption and mental model is that with a lot of the teams in Impact Collective, they're in not the super early stage, but kind of in the established and not going to disappear anytime soon, and in the leaning into the next stage of growth. Am I right in thinking that? 6 years, 3 people. Yeah, wow, that's solid. That's awesome.
You guys feel free to shout out as well. We are a small group of people in this room, so make it a lot more interactive. So like you can unmute your mic and then participate.
First year, 12 people. Wow, yeah, okay, interesting. Cool, well, I mean, a part of this is getting a sense of the size of the team and or the company is great. Like I know a lot of folks are working in teams and companies that are just one team, and maybe folks that have multiple teams in their company. So yeah, it's interesting to see different stages and sizes of growth. That's really helpful. So if I just move on, one of the questions for me is like, why is it worth spending time thinking about this specifically? Like, why remote teamwork, and what do we mean by that? And this won't be a session about top 5 Zoom tips or finding a good microphone and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's been interesting this year with COVID for me, how much the fire hose of that kind of information has just been running at everybody. So really it's a little bit deeper for me. It's like thinking about startups and thinking about growing teams. The reasons why remote teamwork are important are really, to me, it's really fundamental. It's like the better we can get at doing this teamwork well remotely is really about how we can grow our collective brain And our collective brain as a team is like everything. It's how we make sense of complexity, and in startup land, obviously everyone is juggling a lot of that in the market and in their product and in the development. It's the thing that we rely on to manage uncertainty. So it's usually like a stack of uncertainty these days, you know, like there's fundamental uncertainty in the environment and the borders and the markets, and then on top of that the product, and then the team. So it's basically how we execute and deliver. It's how we have fun and how we grow together, and most importantly, right, it's basically how we keep the dream and the team alive. And so for me, when I think about remote working, I'm sort of thinking about this kind of stuff. This is like, how are we building this collective brain, and what are we needing to learn in order to do that and to continue to do that better. So it'll be more about this kind of stuff and less about Zoom tips and that kind of thing. So I just want to also just shout out, like 2020 has been super crazy for everyone. I know when Songyi first described the Impact Collective to me, it was envisioned as a in-person event and like super amazing, ambitious dream to bring all these people together. And obviously that's a very different scenario now. So just keen to hear in the chat, or just unmute yourself and share. But let's just get a sense of like, what are the challenges that you are all experiencing with remote working this year? Like, where are we at? What is it feeling like? Oh, I'll go back. Oh, what am I doing? There we go.
I can start. This is Luke here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? This is Luke. Yeah.
Hi, Luke.
Yeah, so we got founders in 3 countries at the moment. So one is in Berlin. I don't actually know how he got there because he was in Melbourne recently. And yeah, there's people. I'm in Japan, and also our other founders in Washington. So we're really spread out, and this year's been pretty intense to try and just keep the collective brain going. So yeah, really enjoy this session, and any tips would be really helpful. So that's this year for us. It's been very intense. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I know like time zones is just a whole different ball game, right? Like the energy differences of teams at different times of the day is a huge one. Difficulty gauging engagement. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Especially, yeah, forming new teams and growing teams. Are people actually engaging? Are they listening? Are they reading things? I can imagine, yeah, that's really difficult in rural Nepal, being out in the field. Has anyone had to be recruiting over this period as well?
Yeah.
Any sort of specific challenges that have come up with that?
Yeah, it's really hard to see them and feel them with a video call. There is definitely a lot of limitation. And also everybody's going through a really hard time. So like in negotiating the terms and everything is kind of taking longer. And it's just like a lot of different power dynamic has been going on in the recruiting time. So that was quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for me, one of the big things this year has been working with EHF. We're an immigration program, so the borders shutting, and just dealing with the level of anxiety and complication that falls on all of effectively our customers, of our fellows, has just put so much more weight on the team, and we've had to create specific interventions to allow us to be able to support people with heavier stuff, basically. So it's just that sense that everything gets harder. And yeah, if people don't have that in-person context, it's just so hard to build those relationships. Okay, cool. So let's keep going. That's really helpful. Thanks for jumping in and sharing some ideas. One of the main points that I want to make with this whole thing is that I think about remote work like fitness. So it's really about practice. It's not about theories. And I guess that's another thing about the collective brain. It's like laying down those neural pathways of the team. It's like ongoing work. It's hour by hour, week by week, quarter by quarter that this works. And so I mentioned before, like this work for me really is about questions and conversations, not about recipes. So won't be me saying, here's the way in which you do remote work, but more about provocating, like these are the questions that I think it's really valuable for you to consider and to take to your team and to make space to be able to try and work out. And I know in the context of an accelerator program and you're getting all of this information, it's really hard to filter this stuff. So hopefully one or two of these key questions can help you and stand out and allow you to be able to have some really generative conversations with your team over the coming weeks. But yeah, it's long-term fitness. It's marathon fitness. It's not sprinting fitness. So I'm going to talk through I've sort of roughly called it 5 principles of high-performing teams, and just to note, it's adapted from a chapter that I wrote in our book called The 5 Threads That Weave Strong Community Fabric. And so there's more information, and happy to share the PDF of the book if that's helpful, Songi. Just shout out and we can make that happen. Otherwise you can find more about it there. But this is the way that we cut it down. And I guess this isn't just for remote teams. This is really for any high functioning team of human beings, or any sort of collective brain needs these things. Some focus around how we make decisions, some focus around building connection between human beings, some focus around allocating resources and how we do that and what that means to us, focus around gathering together, and focusing around coordinating action. So this is what I'm going to talk through, and we'll just do a few points on each one and give you an example of one particular conversation that you might be able to have that would be useful, and then we'll do a quick breakout and have a discussion about it. So before kicking into that, I guess just thinking about remote work specifically, there's some really significant and important differences that remote opens up. And these to me are often quite easily overlooked, but they should become embedded assumptions. So if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Like, this is a cliche in open source land, I know, and some of you may be really familiar with it, but it's just so important in remote work. You can save yourself so much time over the longer arc of team building when you build this sort of culture of, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Working out how to think about getting everything done where asynchronous communication is default is really interesting. And this is particularly important for folks working across time zones. And it's the difference between waiting 2 days to have a call and sending a 5-minute live updates screen share video and sharing it into Slack so that person can pick it up in 4 hours as opposed to waiting 2 days. And it's just like starting to build the neural pathways and the thinking in which, oh yeah, of course I'll just make a screen share video, 5 minutes, here we go. Not let's have a chat. Just building that up. The organic conversation piece is really interesting. So this is the all of the work that gets done between the work, right? Like leaning over the desk and just having a yarn, bumping into somebody when you're walking between meetings in the street and realizing that they're actually a collaborator that you needed to catch up with. I know when I lived in Wellington, that happened all the time, but you're probably from larger cities. But just how you consciously plan for that organic conversation and how you replace the water cooler. Hashtag water cooler on Slack kind of does it, but going a step further than that. And then acknowledging that finding information requires maps and highways and maintenance. So that's just like it's a knowledge management saying, but just really understanding that need gets dialed up even more in remote work. And then the last one, screen time and energy. And I know you're all in the middle of a massive 3-day sprint with the camp, but screen time and energy really requires a different way of budgeting time and budgeting how much you can achieve and at what times of the day and that kind of stuff. So thinking about that as well. So with making decisions, I've just put 4 examples of questions here. These are the kind of questions that I imagine having a conversation about in your team if you're thinking about laying down this first principle. Who decides what, where, how do we talk about it? How do we talk about and decide how we make a decision? So that's a little bit meta, but it's deciding how we decide. For some teams that have been working together for a while, maybe this is already like an underlying assumption, and maybe it's not written down, or maybe it's not explicit. For some teams, this could be a real big point of contention and a real challenge. But I guess what I'm provoking here is that for any growing organization, if this stuff isn't written down and isn't clear, working remotely, everything becomes a lot harder. So that's like a really fundamental thing. and there's a few other sort of points of here which can turn into bigger conversations that you could take back to your team. Do we want all of our voices considered equally in these decisions? How do some people's voices have more power than others? How do we choose this? And often that's not about, oh, that person's the CEO or that person, it's their job. There's other nuances there about like, what does it mean for this person to disagree completely? It doesn't matter what their job role is. It's like, how do we manage that? And the reason I bring that up for remote work is that you sort of don't have the luxury of being able to have a hug afterwards or a beer and a handshake and just like sort of get that level of humanity involved. And sometimes you really need it. So it's just like, how do you have those upfront conversations about it? That can be a little bit difficult. What are the formats, processes, and tools that we need to make decisions remotely? There's lots of examples about this in the book actually, but Enspiral, the community that I'm most used to, uses a tool called Lumio to do that stuff online. And that sort of creates a really clear, asynchronous, transparent way of making decisions. But there are a million other tools as well that people can use. And I've seen things like just even a spreadsheet that has a log of big decisions that have been made by who and why and how and when can really be helpful for people coming into a team. And then another one, which is more cultural, how much engagement and decisions is expected from everyone. Do we want people to even be spending their time doing this? What's expected in terms of contribution? So to make sense of all of that to start with, my suggestion would be, this is a set of conversations, but what would it look like to start with a written decisions agreement? So this could be a one-page document or a two-page document or a longer if needed, just an overview for everyone in your team to have a shared mental model of how you decide or how you have decided to decide in your team and in your organization. And obviously any applicable tools and processes there. And the thinking is that it doesn't have to be really heavy, like you don't want to create these massive bureaucratic processes, but it needs to be something that's clear enough for day-to-day work, not just for the formal governance that might happen in a boardroom or every quarter or something like that. Before I go on, I just stop there, and if there's any like questions or comments, happy to do those as we roll through. No, cool. All right, I'll just keep rolling. So the second one here is about building connection. We developed this initial idea in a very, like, I guess, human heavy, look after each other heavy community of entrepreneurs. But it's super applicable in remote work. So like, what are those, and these are the conversations again to have in your team, but what are the extra levels of support that people in the team need to feel connected to each other and connected to each other in a more than just commenting on threads together kind of way? Like what is the work that needs to be done by the team in order to really feel like a team over the longer period of time?
10 emails a day, and remember the idea is to get a meeting, not to tell
we've got some,
everything about your company. Just
got some background noise there. Oh, it stopped. Cool. So the other one is similar. How do we proactively build those casual conversations and relationships in the team? How can we better encourage people to find their peers and connections outside of our work, outside of our team, outside of our organization? So what are the things we can do to proactively encourage the equivalent of, like, you know, the remote, the local meetup that you used to do to go find your local community of peers? How do we build a culture of connection in that? So again, like, not giving you the recipes of like, this is the 5 things that you should do, but these are the deeper work of like having these conversations to work that out. If I was to start with one example or one thing that I'd suggest, the skill, like developing the collective skill of checking in well. And so I would go as far as saying the checking in culture at Enspiral over the last decade is what kept me there and what kept many of the people there that really made that place flourish. And the simple principle there is like, at least once a week, at least, there should be a meeting, an important meeting that feels like an important meeting for the team, where you're starting as humans first, not as employees. And so everybody in the team knows that reliably there is always at least one touch point where they can show up to a meeting as themselves and as a human, and that somebody will have a facilitated process to be able to go, let's all hear from each other. And it's known that the half an hour or 20 minutes that that takes is actually a super valuable part of time. And often it's in those spaces that you build the empathy that you need to be able to actually do the work together. And when things get hard or shitty or complicated, you often default back to these spaces as the immune system of the whole team, and the place, like the clearinghouse. And they're often, like, I would say, the easiest things to overlook and get rid of. But usually when times get harder, they're like the most valuable. So moving on to like allocating resources. In a simple sense, this can be thought about as like, what are the things that we have to get the job done? So like, what are the tools and resources that we have as a team, and how conscious are we all in the team of what they are? And it'd be really interesting where a lot of folks, it might just be one or two people in the team that are actually aware of how much money gets spent every month, or like what resources we actually have to be able to draw on. What advisors do we have? What supporters do we have? What investors do we have? Whatever that looks like how do you want to deploy that knowledge across the team? So one thing with remote work specifically is that nothing, you can't take for granted that anyone knows anything. So anything that you want to share, you have to consciously share. So with power, it's like, how do you have that conversation? How do we want to share power across the team? Do we want people to be able to allocate resources? Do we want people to be able to adopt new software as a service tools or build new processes and systems? Like, what's our team knowledge around that stuff? Same with information. I mentioned before, like if it's not consciously, proactively shared, then it probably isn't going to be known about in remote work. So what do we want people to know, and what do we not want them to know, and why? Again, like, important conversations to be had. My suggestion would be as widely as possible, but that's because my default has always been quite bottom-up building structures, but at least at an executive leadership level, it's quite a live conversation. The last one's money. What kind of financial transparency is important and useful, and how do we achieve it? And again, with remote work, you have that added complexity of not being able to just assume that people are going to be able to talk about those things. So being really, really clear about it. And if I was to pick one thing to start with, or like, one place to get into this conversation, is there a resources map or a skills map in your team? And can everyone in the team access it? And that alone is a question that opens up a whole lot of like, oh, we could totally do this, or we should do this, or this is missing. How are we tracking here? Any questions or any thoughts before I keep going?
Yesterday, oh yeah, go ahead. I mean, Charles has questions. What's the skill map?
It can look really different in lots of different places. I've seen skill maps that are literally just spreadsheets that have a list of people's names, a list of the skills that they might have outside of the job that they do, or the tools that they are comfortable using, so that, you might have a situation where you're like, oh, the person who does our accounts also uses Canva or knows how to, or, just sort of enabling people in the team to understand what skills people in the rest of the team have that might be outside of what they expect. And, what are all the different SaaS tools that people have experience with, so that if we're thinking about, oh, we want to bring something else on, or we want to bring something into the team, they can find it. So it could be as simple as a spreadsheet. There's heaps of other tools out there, like MindMeister is another one that I've seen a lot of teams using, which is kind of more like a mind mapping interface. Does that cover that off? MindMeister is the tool. I'm also happy to share a whole lot of links and stuff afterwards as well, if that's helpful for folks.
Oh, sudah ambil bagi saya. Saya baru mau.
Cool. All right, so moving on to the next one, gathering together. So this is a lot more fun when we can do it not remote, but super critical, I guess. Also thinking about the budget around screen time with remote work and that becoming really present. But what is our critical team meeting rhythm? How much time are we going to invest in gathering outside of meetings? So what I mean by that is we did this with EHF when we went to remote, but we just had a banter time and it was in people's diary, and not everyone showed up, but it was like invested in and planned for, that you could just show up to a Zoom room that would be unfacilitated, that would just be about banter. And often that was where the extroverts really showed up, and the people that just need to do some processing and some thinking and some yarning and talking to each other. And the other one here that I've noticed a big pattern of this year is the how many meetings is too many. Like, it has never been easier to book a meeting. It has never been easier to bring everyone together in a lot of ways. And there's very little transaction cost, and you can fit in a meeting between your other meetings because you don't have to move. But the cost of that can be really high. And so the opposite of a meeting for me is a voice message, and like building that culture in your team of being able to ask that question, how many meetings is too many? Is this actually a meeting, or is it a conversation, or is it a voice message? Like, can you pick this up in 12 hours when you wake up? Would that be better than trying to do a meeting late at night? That kind of stuff. And so again, no recipes here, but a lot of questions and conversations that the value will be had not in this call, but in when you have this conversation with your team, if that makes sense. I promise that's not a cop-out for me, just not wanting to tell you what to do. And if I was to sort of suggest one way of getting this started in your team, it's like create the how to not have a meeting guide. Sorry, that should say guide. Create the shared resource that people have in their head, which is like, how do I avoid bringing everyone's diaries together? Or what are the steps what are the other interventions that I can take? Is it a quick Zoom meeting with myself where I screen share and record it and talk through a document and show people what I'm thinking, and that takes 3 minutes, and then I just email that link to everybody or put it into the Slack and say, hey everyone, watch this video? And does that replace a meeting? Or is it just like I said, like a WhatsApp voice message, or is it a phone call? What are the processes that you can do in your team to not have a meeting, and create that as a written guide, and push that out to everyone to make that collective brain stronger. Last one. So coordinating action. This is like the how we get shit done, how we get things done approach. So how do we openly prioritize the work to do? How do we approve and drop work that we don't want to get done? How do we hold accountability and support? And how do we plan to do maintenance of task management? So like the easy default here is like some sort of Asana or Trello or shared mental model of project management. But for doing it really well, I think starting with accountability and support is a really good place to start. So that's like a how to finish a project guide is how I would describe that. So what's the conversation to have in your team around, all right, we've just finished a piece of work, a big piece of work, like what happens now? And that's a really interesting place to do it, because that's where you can really see if it's gone well or if it hasn't gone so well. What's the support and structures needed in order to create more efficient outcomes next time? Sometimes it can be something like a retrospective, if folks are using like agile processes, a meeting where you have a facilitated process to go through what's worked, what hasn't, and what would change next time. But I think it can go much further than that. And it's like, well, let's get the team together and not sit down, but like have a conversation about it, and we've finished a project. What are the conversations what are the questions we ask ourselves? So Songi, the thought here was to jump into some breakouts. I guess we could do a sense check whether or not folks think it's worth it. We've got how many people on the call?
14. I mean, including you and I, so it's 12 participants.
So we could do, you know, small groups of 4, 3 small groups of 4. But the thinking here was, I've just given you a whole lot to think about, but if there was one place to start, I'd suggest decision making, because decision making touches everything else, and it gets to the heart of the gnarly conversations and the tricky conversations around power. And the person who mentioned that their team is split across multiple time zones, this is a really, really, really important one for folks that, you know, they don't want to be in meetings late at night making decisions necessarily. Vice versa, people don't necessarily want to be waking up super early in the morning for a call to be able to make decisions. So how can we balance this and figure this out is a really, really important piece in building high functioning remote teamwork. So the thought was we could have probably maybe 7 minutes, 8 minutes to have some time in small groups to have a conversation about these questions and how you do it in your teams and what it brings up. If folks are happy for that.
Yeah, the room is ready.
Oh, look at that, magic, awesome.
Yeah.
I'll broadcast in a few of the question prompts, but see how you go as well. Just
all right.
Getting started.
See you in a bit. Like we have a 10 minutes in total till the end, so we were probably going to spend 5 minutes altogether. What do you think?
Perfect. That sounds good. Oh, it's gone fast.
And see if you can give me the questions, and I will pass to the room.
Sure. Do you want me to join this room as well?
You don't have to. Mariam, if you can join that room. Luca is alone. And if you want to join, okay. I will move him to some other room. Move to breakout 4. Move to, show me. Oh no. Oh shit, I should have said.
Songi, I will send it to you in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often see decision making. People were never asked to be part of decision making because it was more passive, right? I mean, your boss tells you what to do. So decision making is quite a deep topic for many people.
I think this is the most interesting thing about this whole piece of work is like, normally it's like, and I guess that's what I wanted to throw in a bit of a challenge today. Like when we talk about remote work, we think, okay, get your camera right and your microphone and Zoom and show up. But it's actually, it goes like rip the lid and you go so much further, you know, like this actually really important. Like how do we understand what decisions have been made when we're not in the same room?
Yeah, right. Do you want me to send the second question as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's true. And then this can be quite a lot of food for thought actually to think of like all the 5 different points is really incredible. But then often I also hear the same question all the time, like, how do you do that? And then so it's just like a very basic of communicating and decision making and all of that are new. Yeah. By the way, there are one question from Tiffany. How to bring these guidelines to life by integrating it into a cultural company. So that can be last question to end.
Yeah, I'll weave that in.
Yeah. Joshua did the team and culture yesterday, so they have a little bit of aware of what the team and culture, and it was really good, and everybody had a lots of questions about team and culture. And so we will probably have to cover at some point with the other session.
Yeah, I thought about this session in a couple of different ways, but I think provoking the questions felt like more long-term useful.
Yeah, totally.
And accelerated programs are just also always one of those periods where you can undergo rapid change. So like thinking about the more fundamental side of it is important.
How are you today? Good.
It's going okay? Are you tired?
I'm good. I'm very happy that it's coming to the end. We have one more session. Next session, I'm running Joseph's, and then Katie Grainer is joining, and then she will do the session. Lots of our fellow joining. Yesterday, like we had a 12 home group, and the 6 of them are EHF people, including myself.
That's great.
I like using fellows like slave, you know? Oh my goodness. I feel so bad.
No, contributors.
They're so good. Yeah, and then what is it? The Steffi is doing a great job facilitating as well.
Did you put the second question in, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Let me know when you are bringing people back a minute before.
Yeah, when should I bring them back? Like maybe 3 more minutes?
We've got to finish at 10 minutes to the hour, is that right? Or
yeah, right.
I have that. So we're finishing in 5 minutes, is that right?
Oh shit, my computer says it's 5:42, and now my phone says 5:45. So should I bring people back? 1 more minute and then
1 more minute. 1 more minute, yeah.
If I click the close all room, they will all come back, or is it giving me the option of?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing the slide with us?
Yeah, of course.
That would be nice. I want to do the practice with my Weave members.
Yeah, we should do it with EHF too.
Yeah, now all the teams given 60 more seconds, so people will probably gonna come back or come back in a minute.
Cool. I'll do just a quick, has there been any?
And we have a just 10-minute break, so you can just go a little behind. It's so totally fine. It doesn't have to be 50 sharp.
It's all good. I didn't realize I talked for so much. It just went really fast.
Yeah, through that. Yeah, there are a few good teams from New Zealand.
Welcome back, everyone.
Hi.
Before we dive into the finish, wondering if there's any anything anyone wants to share from the small groups, any insights or aha moments?
Yeah, maybe what Patricia was just telling us, because there's two or three time zones for her case as well. And just trying to chase up people when there's a deadline and it's like 2 a.m. in the other time zone. We're not sure what to do. Yeah.
You mean like if there's an urgent thing that has to happen and they should have looked at it by now and they just haven't responded?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't, I mean, and there's no response till what, at least 1 day later or two. It's hard to, yeah, that's the hardest to manage, especially if you have 3 different time zones, you're saying, right?
Yeah, and if deadlines don't shift, do they? That's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's already hard with Asia and New York, but if you try to mix Asia, New York, and Argentina, I mean, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, the most high functioning teams I've been part of are the ones where it's like a decision like that just has like a 2 or 3 day or like 48-hour process around it, and it's taken a long time to get to that point. But it's like you tell people what you got to tell them, you tell them what you told them, you tell them one more time what you told them, and it's just like it does add weight, but it really elevates the yeah. Interesting. Any other thoughts popped up?
I had a question about one thing that's kind of come up is, you know, a lot of people talking about democratic, organic, or like even like horizontal decision-making processes. I know in my experience, you know, that there's definitely pros and cons to autocracy versus, you know, democracy. I'm just curious, in your experience, or if you could just weigh in on this, like, what's the biggest challenge of a more horizontal versus vertical structure, and what is like your maybe solution that you've come up with for that?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and that's the thing about decision making. It, like I was saying to Songyu before, like when you rip the lid off that one, it really opens up everything. Enspiral has been like I guess like quite an activisty, fundamental bottom-up sort of wiring to the organization. So when I was sitting on the board of Enspiral Foundations, we had sort of like a governance role, and the way that I would describe that is like a very democratic field with very, very clear little pockets of autocracy. So it's like mini pyramids that pop up where needed to deliver specific functions, but there is a much longer, wider time scale in which you can change those pyramids. So it's kind of like yes and, but so there'll be some things that, okay, if this is a democratic decision and it's going out into the whole field, into the whole team or into the whole company, there's a timeline and a cost associated with that, and sense making and getting your head around it, and discussion and convergence, and then in the actual process of deciding. So when we do that in Enspiral, and as we've grown from 5 people to 12 to 50 to now sort of more like 150, 200, those things are really, really big deals. It's almost like referendums, agreements that come up, and they're very slow moving. So we sort of have learned over time, there's not many of them, but they're very big core pieces of infrastructure. And so they go out democratically. And then within that, there's a whole lot of smaller, more nimble things that can obviously get done at the speed of whatever the work needs to happen.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So I'm going to share my slides again and get us off to the finish.
We had one last question though, from Tiffany. Yeah, and it's on the chat. I'm trying to open it. Yeah, how to bring this guideline to life by integrating it into a culture of company.
Yeah, I mean, that is the work, really. I guess what I've shared today is a whole lot of principles and ideas and questions. And so bringing them to life is the work to do. My short answer to that is like conversation by conversation. It's like actually making the time and designing into your team the space in order to be able to have these discussions and work them out. Some of them, it's also not about implementing, it's about, it is how you are together. And so you slowly build the patterns over time. Like the fitness, it's like someone isn't just automatically fit. They go for a run every day, or they make that effort. They've put that time into their day in order to put their shoes on, build a process around it, get out the door, run, come back, eating well. And there's a whole lot of things that are associated with it. So I guess, yeah, the way I'd come back to it is these are principles for practice and they're not a recipe. And like, just, I guess, just to even go a little bit further along that, like how you practice and build fitness in your team can be really different. So, sorry, I've just missed your name, but whoever said just before around the autocratic versus democratic way of doing things, just being guided by what problem that you're actually trying to solve and what impact that you're trying to make. So if you're an organization that's working in a particular market that has particular challenges, like your team culture should be in service of solving that problem. And maybe that means that you have to be a bigger, slower moving movement type of thing that wants to scale up to, like, I don't know, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, or whatever that looks like. Or maybe it's actually the way in which you're building your company and your team is more like a team of 6. And you can be highly effective at making the impact that you're trying to make with a team of 6 to 8. And so they need different ways of thinking about how to implement this stuff. So my suggestion with it always is like, don't be guided by what's flashy or what someone tells you is the way to do it. If holacracy is so hot right now, it doesn't mean that it's right. If something else is so hot right now, it doesn't mean that it's right. It's like, let the problem be the guide, and let the impact like help you work out what you're trying to do. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, these are the cliches, right? But they are true. It's like ultimately learning by doing together as that specific group of humans is the only way to do this. So your team is your team, and your ways of working together and the patterns that you build are like, they don't belong to the logo, and they don't live in a handbook. They live in those human beings. And so by doing it over and over and over again and continuing to do it is the only way. Encouraging people to try things. And then this third one to me is really critical. It's like proving to your team that it actually is safe to fail. Is so important. And I hear this a lot with, like, you know, to be innovative and to do interesting things, you've got to be like up for taking risks, and you've got to be okay to fail. But then when it actually happens, that's when the real stress test happens. So how does the collective brain respond in those scenarios? You know, like what happens when somebody comes to a check-in at a meeting and they are like really actually quite devastated about something that they've tried to do that hasn't worked? Like, what happens in that scenario? How does your team respond? How does the organization like continue? What do you learn from it? How do you grow? Super easy to talk about and really hard to do. But that's kind of like the A game to work for, is like, how can we prove to each other that we have the capacity to make this safe to fail? And then from there, it's just closing the loop. It's keeping getting better. To me, that's the work. So it's like, these are true for remote teams and not remote teams, but all of those things that make remote working hard just get dialed up and put into focus to do this well. That's kind of it from me. There's a couple of links here that could be helpful and useful. As I mentioned to Songi, really happy to share the PDF with the participants of Impact Collective if they want to have a look through the book, which was written by 11 people and sort of digs into lots more ideas and topics and resources in this along some of these lines. But yeah, up for final questions and discussion before we close up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like Enspiral, I'm part of Enspiral as well, and then Joe Cheval, who showed up yesterday for Team and Culture, he's actually the founder of the Enspiral, so you guys can probably get a lot of juicy wisdom from this book. So we will be sharing the PDF. If anyone wants it, let us know. I think Ends today give us not just a tip to set up the camera and lighting right for the remote team, but also a really good set of the questions that is can be a great food for thoughts for us in the long term. So yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you so much. And building culture into the team is really, you got to decide what kind of culture that I want to build, what kind of structure, organizational structure I want to build, and what kind of leadership you want to build in the team. And there's no right answer to that, but you got to just be the core of that, and then inviting your team member and then build it together. And that's the my answer to the Tiffany, actually, like build a guideline together with the team member if you want to, and then like bringing more people into the decision making. And it's hard at the beginning, but it's long term is worth it. So if you guys are more interested in this kind of decision making, more democratic way of working and decentralized organization, things like that, I'll be happy to answer as well alongside with the Ends. So feel free to ping us. And is there any other burning questions from the floor? I think everybody's hungry.
Yeah.